January 18, 1944. The winter rain swept across Whitehall as a single telegram, stamped "Most Secret," was carried through the corridors of the British War Cabinet, its contents destined to unsettle the most powerful alliance of the Second World War. The paper was thin, the ink precise, and the words chosen with care. Yet every sentence carried weight, far heavier than its physical form. It was a message Winston Churchill never intended American eyes to read, a telegram that exposed fear, calculation, and the fragile limits of trust between allies. By early 1944, the war had reached a critical juncture. The Axis powers were no longer advancing unchecked, but victory was far from assured. Every decision carried consequences measured not only in miles gained, but in lives lost. And beneath the public unity of the Allied cause, private anxiety simmered. Churchill, Britain's indomitable prime minister, was a master of words. His speeches rallied nations, his rhetoric stiffened resolve, and his confidence projected certainty. But telegrams told a different story. They revealed hesitation, doubt, and the strategic fears rarely spoken aloud. This particular telegram was written at a moment when Britain stood at a crossroads. Its empire was exhausted, its cities battered, its manpower stretched thin. Across the Atlantic, the United States surged with industrial strength and fresh divisions. The balance of power within the alliance was shifting, and Churchill knew it. The roots of the telegram lay years earlier, in the desperate summer of 1940. When France fell and Britain stood alone, Churchill turned instinctively to the United States. At the time, America was not yet at war, restrained by isolationist sentiment. Support came slowly, cautiously, and always with conditions. Lend-Lease had saved Britain from collapse. American food, fuel, and weapons crossed the Atlantic under constant threat from U-boats. Yet reliance bred vulnerability. Britain's survival increasingly depended on American goodwill. By 1942, after Pearl Harbor, the alliance was formalized. British and American officers planned together, fought together, and shared intelligence. But equality was an illusion. The United States now possessed overwhelming economic and military leverage. Churchill admired American energy, but he feared American impatience. He worried that Washington underestimated the complexity of the European war. Above all, he feared an early, catastrophic assault on Western Europe. A failed invasion could doom Britain itself. The memory of the Somme and Passchendaele haunted British planners. They remembered what happened when optimism overruled preparation. Churchill had lived through the First World War at the highest levels of command. He refused to repeat its mistakes. Yet American leaders pressed relentlessly for a cross-channel invasion. They argued that delay only prolonged the war and strengthened Germany. General George C. Marshall, calm and relentless, made his case in memoranda and meetings. To him, the shortest path to Berlin lay through France. Churchill disagreed, profoundly. He favored what he called the peripheral strategy. Attacks through North Africa, Italy, and the Mediterranean, bleeding Germany from the edges. It was a strategy shaped as much by imperial interests as by military caution. The tension was never fully resolved. It was managed, postponed, and buried beneath polite diplomacy. But by late 1943, the issue could no longer be avoided. Operation Overlord was taking shape. As Allied planners gathered in Tehran in November 1943, the debate reached its peak. President Franklin D. Roosevelt, a skilled mediator, listened carefully to both sides. Joseph Stalin, blunt and unsympathetic, demanded a second front in France without delay. The Soviet Union was bleeding millions of men on the Eastern Front. Churchill felt cornered. The political cost of refusal was immense. Yet privately, he doubted whether Britain, or the alliance, was ready. And it was in this atmosphere that the telegram was conceived. Back in London, Churchill dictated messages late into the night. He walked the floor in his siren suit, cigar clenched between his fingers. Maps were spread across tables, marked with arrows and question marks. Every route into Europe seemed soaked in blood. The telegram in question was addressed to a small circle of British officials. It was not intended for Washington. Its language was unfiltered, its tone unusually candid, and its conclusions were alarming. Churchill warned that a premature invasion of France could end in disaster. He feared catastrophic casualties and the collapse of British forces. He wrote of German defenses stronger than publicly acknowledged, and he questioned whether American planners truly understood the risks. One line, in particular, stood out. Churchill suggested that if Overlord failed, Britain might face invasion or political collapse. The words were not dramatic flourish. They were sober assessment. He spoke of Britain's last reserves of strength, of a nation that could not afford another Dunkirk on French soil, of an empire already cracking under wartime strain. These were not thoughts meant for Allied morale bulletins. The telegram concluded with a plea, not for delay, but for caution. Churchill urged alternatives, diversions, and flexibility. He wanted options preserved, not commitments locked in stone. Above all, he wanted time. The problem was that secrecy is fragile in wartime. Messages passed through hands, offices, and encryption rooms. Even the most restricted telegrams left traces. And somewhere along the chain, American intelligence caught wind. The British and Americans shared code-breaking operations at Bletchley Park. Ultra-intelligence flowed freely, but not everything was meant to be mutual. This telegram sat outside agreed channels. Its tone raised eyebrows among those who glimpsed its contents. When American officers learned of Churchill's private doubts, reactions were mixed. Some understood as caution. Others saw it as a lack of resolve. A few interpreted it as political maneuvering. General Marshall was reportedly furious. He believed Britain was dragging its feet deliberately. To him, every Mediterranean diversion meant more Soviet dead, and the telegram seemed to confirm his suspicions. President Roosevelt reacted more subtly. He did not confront Churchill directly. Instead, he applied pressure through conferences and personal correspondence. The message was clear: Overlord would proceed. Churchill, for his part, doubled down publicly. In speeches and broadcasts, he spoke of unity and determination. He praised American troops and promised Britain's full commitment. The telegram was buried, its existence denied. Yet its shadow lingered. British commanders quietly adjusted their expectations. Contingency plans were expanded. Medical units prepared for casualty numbers few dared to voice. Among British officers, rumors circulated. Some spoke of Churchill's fears in hushed tones. Others dismissed them as pessimism. But no one doubted the invasion would be costly. When June 6, 1944 finally arrived, the telegram seemed distant. The beaches of Normandy erupted in fire and steel. Young men stormed ashore under relentless machine gun fire. For many, history ended there. The invasion succeeded, but just barely. Casualties were staggering. Entire units were shattered within hours. Churchill followed the reports with grim silence. Privately, he acknowledged both relief and vindication. The fears expressed in the telegram had not been unfounded. Overlord had teetered on the edge of catastrophe. Weather chance and human endurance had tipped the balance. In the months that followed, the war ground on through France and into Germany. The alliance held, but strains persisted. Strategic disagreements continued until the final surrender, and the telegram remained classified, unseen by the public. After the war, as archives slowly opened, historians uncovered fragments of it. Not the full text, but references, notes, and recollections. They revealed a Churchill more vulnerable than legend suggested, a leader burdened by the knowledge of what failure would mean. The telegram challenged the myth of seamless Allied unity. It showed that victory was not inevitable, nor universally believed. It was the product of doubt, argument, and compromise, and of leaders willing to voice fears even when they could not share them openly. In later years, Churchill reflected often on the war. He spoke proudly of Britain's role and the alliance with America, but he rarely mentioned the telegram. Some burdens were meant to remain private. Those who read it after his death saw a different side of leadership. Not bravado, but responsibility. Not confidence, but calculation. A man weighing the fate of a nation in every sentence. The telegram Churchill never wanted Americans to see was not an act of betrayal. It was an act of honesty, confined to the narrowest circle. A reminder that even history's greatest figures wrestled with fear, and that victory was forged not only through courage, but through doubt. In the end, the alliance endured. The invasion succeeded. The war was won. But behind the triumph stood a single piece of paper, quietly bearing witness to how close everything came to falling apart.